All right, so in the last lesson, we got our application all set up, and now we're ready to start using Eloquent, or we're almost ready to start using Eloquent. So if you remember in the last lesson, I said Eloquent is an ORM, which stands for Object Relational Mapping. So that means that we're going to need objects to interact with, or Eloquent needs objects in order to interact with our database. So I wanted to point out one thing about how we need to make these models. So Eloquent kind of in Laravel follows this convention that your database table should have a specific name and your object or model should have a name that kind of matches. It's not exactly the same, but it's pretty close. So in the database, our table, let's say we're going to use the films one, is called films, right? So lowercase, plural, and it's called films. But if we want to create a model for Eloquent to use, we want to generate one that's called film, singular, and then it's a capital F and lowercase ILM. And that is so that Eloquent will automatically look for, so if we name it film, a capital F, then Eloquent will automatically know to look in the films table for our data. And we could make this model manually, but Laravel provides us a certain way, or provides us a command to generate that using Artisan. So we need to run in our terminal, in our directory, PHP Artisan make model film, and that's going to generate a model for us, and then put it into the app directory of our application. So we'll run that. We come back and we see, cool, we have this model that's been generated for us by that command. Now, all it's really done is put the namespace of our application, reference the Eloquent model, and then set up this class that extends that model. That's it. We haven't done anything else. But that is enough for us to actually run some Eloquent calls that delegate down into SQL that then delegates to the database and returns that data for us. So let's see what we can do with that pretty much right out of the box just by running one command. So if we create just a little dummy route so we can test, this won't actually be in the code. This is just for me to kind of mess around with on screen. So we can say return app. So we need the namespace here. Or I guess we could reference it up here and say use app film. And then down here, we don't need it. So we're going to use this first call, which is in the documentation, and it's basically returns the first row in the database for the table that we're trying to access. And in this case, since we're using the film model, that's going to be the films table. So if we look at the database here for the films, right, we see this Academy Dinosaur title, got a description for it, release year, rental rate, length, 86, all that good stuff. But if we go check out this route in the browser, we're going to get back this essentially, it looks like a JSON response because Laravel automatically casts the model for us to JSON. But if you're working with it in PHP, it's going to be an object, and I think you can even access it like an array. But regardless, right now it's an object, right? So that's kind of what JSON is anyway. So we're just seeing a pretty easy representation of that data that we just did with that simple call of first, right, on the film object. So let's say we wanted to use one of these data points, right? So like title or description or something like that in some part of our application. Well, Eloquent provides some magic from PHP and creates essentially properties that we can access on the objects just using PHP object notation. So in this case, we need to grab the film, stick it in a variable, and then we're going to return the film. And then let's say we just want the title, right? So using the little arrow here, we can then access any field on our database table as a property on our film object. So if we go back to the browser and we refresh, now we're just getting the title of the movie, right? Which was the first record in the database, and that lines up. Now, one thing you might be questioning is if our film object is only is an empty object essentially other than extending this model, how does it know what table to look at? So let's look at another example. Let's generate a model called movie, right? Because film and movie are relatively synonymous. Let's say you generate movie instead of film, and you want to use that instead of film, right? For whatever reason. But your table, you could either rename your database table, or you could leave it and just use your movie model. So if we change these declarations to movie instead of film, right, and we try to load that in our browser, we get an error, as you would expect, because Laravel doesn't know which table to look at, or Eloquent doesn't know which table to look at. It's looking for, if you actually look in this error message, it says base table or view not found. Table Eloquent 101 movies doesn't exist. And Eloquent 101 is the name of our database, and then table movies is what it's looking for. But we have, a model that's called movie. Well, let's say you needed to change this. You can't, for some reason, name your model film. You got to use movie for whatever reason. Well, Eloquent provides a way for you to override the default of it looks for the name of the class and then pluralized, right? So you can just say protected table and then say you want to look for films. Now, if we come back here, right, because this code, this little snippet is still using the movie. So if we come back here, refresh, now we get the same title that we got before when we were using the film model. And that's because we told it, hey, actually use this table instead of movies. So if we came back to the film object, or we switched this code back to be film instead of movie, right? Then this should still work because it's still looking at the films table. So it doesn't really matter if there's multiple models using the same table. It's just you need to either follow the convention, which means you don't have to designate this, or you can, if you need to override it, you can designate it and say, use this table instead of the default one you would look for. But since we don't need two models, I'm going to go ahead and delete the movie model, and then we can just move on with our film one. So we saw that you can access any of these fields in the database as a property on our film object. But if you tried to do that for created at, you might get back something that's going to surprise you. So you get back, if you're looking at it in the browser, it should look like this. It's going to be a JSON object, but this is actually a Carbon instance, and Carbon is an object. It's a package that Carbon is a wrapper around PHP's date time class, but it allows you to format your date times pretty easily. And Laravel automatically casts like your created at updated fields to Carbon instances. But that allows you to then, you can chain calls onto them, because right here, this created at is an instance of Carbon. So we can we can call format on that instance of Carbon and format the date time basically however we want. And these are the same as PHP's date function. So you can pass in, if you want these to be slashes, that doesn't matter. If you want the time, right, HIS, then you're going to get that. All those little different date little characters, you can format to whatever you want. There's also like a to_date_time string, I think, if I remember correctly. And so that's automatically going to format it like that, which is pretty much similar to what goes into the database. So, but that's kind of just a little heads up on created at and updated at, that you're going to have these objects automatically that you can further call functions on. So other than that, I think that's the first quick first lesson on getting started. And in the next couple lessons, we'll move on to additional, essentially query calls, and then how you can, limit the query and do different things with it. So anyway, stay tuned. We'll get into some much more advanced stuff before too long.